The prairie stretched wide under the dying light of the sun, its colors fading into dusky purples and golds. At the edge of Red Creek town stood the little cabin Rosalie had made her sanctuary. Years had hardened her, left scars both on her skin and deeper still in her heart. Once she had been the belle of every barn dance, laughter lighting up the room. But an accident with a runaway wagon had left her face marked with jagged scars, reminders she couldn't hide. Since that day, she kept her head lowered and her heart locked away. Townsfolk were polite but distant, some pitied her, others whispered behind her back. For Rosalie, loneliness had become a way of life. She told herself no man would ever look at her again, not the way she secretly longed for. Daniel Hayes, a cowboy known for his steady hand and quiet strength, wasn't the type to chase gossip. He'd returned to Red Creek after months on cattle drives, carrying the kind of weariness only the open range could give. But even through the dust of his travels, he noticed Rosalie. He remembered her as the young woman with a radiant smile before the accident. Now he saw her walking quickly through town with her bonnet pulled low, avoiding every glance. Something in that sight stirred him, not pity, but a pull stronger than reason. He knew scars didn't erase beauty, if anything, they told stories of survival. And Daniel had lived enough life to admire survival. One evening, Rosalie stood outside her cabin, gathering laundry from the line when she heard the sound of boots on gravel. She tensed instantly, instinctively turning her face away. Daniel's voice came low, respectful, "Evenin', Miss Rosalie." She nearly dropped the basket. Few men approached her, and none with that steady kindness in their tone. "Mr. Hayes," she replied quickly, keeping her gaze on the ground. He asked if she'd like help carrying the heavy basket, but she shook her head. "I can manage," she said sharply, her chest tightening. Daniel didn't push, only tipped his hat and walked on. But that night, Rosalie couldn't stop thinking about the way his voice had carried no judgment. The next days brought small encounters, Daniel holding open the mercantile door for her, tipping his hat when she passed, offering to fix the squeaky hinge on her cabin. Each time, Rosalie's heart raced and her instinct was to retreat. She had convinced herself that her scars made her unworthy of notice, let alone affection. And yet Daniel kept showing up, not with grand gestures, but in quiet ways that chipped slowly at her walls. Still, she fought it, telling herself he'd lose interest once he truly saw her. It happened on a stormy afternoon. Rosalie had been in town, and rain forced her into the livery barn for shelter. Lightning split the sky, thunder rattling the walls, and she pressed back into the shadows, clutching her shawl to hide her face. Daniel stepped in moments later, shaking rain from his hat. When his eyes found hers, her heart jolted painfully. "Rosalie," he said softly, moving closer. She turned sharply away, whispering, "Don't look at me." Her voice cracked with the raw ache of years of shame. The words weren't meant as a command, they were a plea. She couldn't bear him seeing her scars in the harsh light of a storm. Daniel froze, not out of hesitation, but out of the weight of her pain. Then he said, with a voice steady enough to silence even the thunder, "I'll never look away." The word struck deep, more than any compliment could. Rosalie's throat tightened as tears threatened. "You don't mean that," she whispered. But Daniel stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've ridden through storms, faced down wild cattle, and slept under skies that could swallow a man whole. But nothing I've seen could make me turn away from you. Not then, not now, not ever." Rosalie shook her head, trembling. "You don't know what you're saying. Look at me, Daniel. Look." She dropped the shawl from her face, forcing him to see the scars in full. The barn lantern flickered, highlighting every jagged line. She expected revulsion, pity, something that confirmed her deepest fears. But Daniel didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze steady, his voice low. "I am looking. And all I see is a woman braver than most men I know. You survived. That makes you beautiful." Her defenses cracked then, years of self-loathing crumbling under the weight of his honesty. Tears spilled freely, and for the first time, she didn't turn away to hide them. Daniel reached out, slow and careful, giving her every chance to pull back. But Rosalie didn't. When his rough, calloused hand touched her cheek, it wasn't just her skin he held, it was every wound, every fear, every lonely night she had carried alone. The storm raged outside, but inside the barn, time seemed to still. Rosalie leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, letting herself feel seen for the first time in years. Daniel whispered, "Don't let those scars tell your story. Let your strength tell it. And don't think for a second I'll ever look away." She sobbed softly, not from sorrow but from the release of years of silence. When she opened her eyes again, Daniel's gaze was still fixed on her, unwavering. From that day forward, Rosalie no longer walked with her bonnet pulled low. She still bore the scars, but something had shifted. Daniel walked beside her in town, daring anyone to question his devotion. The whispers faded, replaced with quiet admiration. Folks saw not just Rosalie's scars but her courage, and Daniel's loyalty turned what had once been gossip into respect. For Rosalie, it wasn't just about being loved, it was about being truly seen. Months passed, and their bond deepened. Daniel brought laughter back into Rosalie's life, and Rosalie gave Daniel the home he had long searched for in all his wanderings. He didn't treat her scars as something to be ignored but as part of her. Proof that she had endured what others could not. And slowly, Rosalie learned to believe it too. On the day Daniel asked her to marry him, it wasn't in front of a crowd or with grand spectacle. It was beneath the open sky, with wildflowers brushing against their boots and the wind carrying the scent of prairie grass. Daniel knelt, not to make a show, but to keep a promise. "Rosalie," he said, "I'll spend my life proving I'll never look away." Her tears fell freely as she whispered yes, and for the first time, Rosalie believed she was not just chosen but cherished. The cowboy's vow had become her truth, love that saw her, scars and all, and would never turn aside. The wedding was small but filled with warmth. The townsfolk who once whispered behind Rosalie's back now came forward with smiles, humbled by the quiet power of her story. She walked down the aisle in a dress she had stitched herself, the fabric plain but beautiful in its simplicity, every thread carrying her hope for the future. Daniel waited at the altar with a steady gaze, the kind of look that told her she was the only one he saw. When they exchanged vows, Daniel's voice didn't waver once. "I'll never look away," he promised again, the same words that had healed her months before. And when the church bells rang, Rosalie felt as though the sound was breaking chains she had carried for years. Married life brought new rhythms. The cabin that had once echoed with silence now overflowed with laughter, the creak of boots on the floor, the smell of coffee in the mornings, and the soft strum of Daniel's guitar at night. Rosalie, who had once been afraid to be seen, now found herself holding Daniel's hand in public without hesitation. At first, she would catch herself lowering her head, but Daniel's gentle squeeze always reminded her to lift it. People noticed, but what mattered was how she felt inside, stronger, freer, and more alive than she had ever believed possible. Seasons passed. On the ranch, Rosalie worked alongside Daniel, proving her hands were just as capable as his. She learned to ride again without fear, her skirts flying in the wind as Daniel rode beside her. There were days of struggle, droughts, long hours, and moments when the weight of the past tried to creep back into her mind. But Daniel's words remained her anchor. Each time she faltered, he reminded her, "I'll never look away." And slowly, Rosalie realized she no longer needed to hide. Her scars didn't define her, they were simply part of the woman who had been brave enough to keep living. One evening, they sat on the porch together, the horizon painted in fiery streaks of orange and pink. Rosalie rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, listening to the low hum of crickets and the rustle of prairie grass. "Do you ever wonder why God let me survive?" she asked softly. Daniel took a long breath, then answered in his steady way, "So I could find you. So I could see you the way others couldn't." Rosalie closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. For the first time, she no longer questioned why her life had been spared, she simply thanked heaven that it had. Years later, when their children played in those same fields, Rosalie often stood at the doorway watching them with a heart so full it ached. Daniel would come up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pressing a kiss against the scarred cheek she once hated. She no longer flinched, she smiled. The woman who once whispered, "Don't look at me," now lived every day with the certainty that she was loved, seen, and cherished beyond measure. And every time Daniel's eyes met hers, even after decades, his vow remained unbroken: he would never look away.